Hi, Kevin. I wanted to leave you some feedback on your rough draft. As a whole, I think that there are some interesting things that you're talking about in this narrative. So I think that what you have in these first two pages are enough for you to work with um, for the whole paper. I think it's just looking at the moments where you're being a little broad and being a little vague and, kind of slowing your pace down and expanding those ideas out in more depth. So, this first paragraph, for example, would be a good place for you to really pause and see it, the paragraph, what I mean by it, as actually more than one paragraph. So, why I say that is you have a lot of different ideas all in this one paragraph. And the way that readers like paragraphs, organized is based on chunked information, meaning that a paragraph focuses on one main idea, right? And all the ideas in that paragraph, or excuse me, all the sentences in that paragraph are supporting that idea. You've got a lot of good ideas here, but you're shifting around, right? So it looks like you're talking a little bit about racism here and here. You talk a little bit about service, right? Being in the military, um, more about racism, but and then down here you begin to talk about values from your parents, music, and then family traditions. Now, all of these ideas are, I think, the things that have shaped you, right? Because you're kind of talking about family has shaped you, the military has shaped you, and growing up with an awareness of racism has shaped you as well. But what I want you to think about doing is presenting these ideas all in separate paragraphs, right? So, what you're really trying to capture is, you say that I have changed so much over the past 3 decades. Begin thinking about how these different, these different, I don't know, uh, entities, I guess, have shaped you, right? So let's kind of like hone in and um, think about where you could expand. Um, so here you say, my society and my country I love dearly have served for the lifestyles I've fought for would have once rejected me. So note that the general idea to the reader is clear, but most of the ideas in this sentence are far too broad for the reader to really understand what you're talking about, right? So, what country, um, what specific society are you referring to, right? Because there's a lot of different societies in a single country. And then I think the reader also needs to understand on what are you basing that rejection, right? I assume that you're talking about racism here, but it's not entirely clear from the sentence. So I think you slowing down and thinking about that vague language would help out quite a bit. And I also think kind of separating this discussion about the history of racism in the United States from your service will help out. So, what's going on is you're kind of blending these two ideas together at once. And I do think that they connect, right? Because you're kind of saying, look, I, I took an oath to defend this country and I'm proud to do it. But at the same time, like I'm clearly recognizing that we have issues in this country, very, very deep issues. And so I get what you're kind of doing here, but you're really rushing. So I want you to slow down the pace and really talk about who you are as a serviceman. Right? So what branch are you in? Why did you get involved? How did you get involved? How did your ideas about service become formed? And then either before or after that, wherever you want to place it, right? in terms of also talking about um, institutionalized racism. uh, you put that in its own paragraph. And then I think the ideas of these values that your parents gave to you can be in its own paragraph, and with family tradition too. Like, this would be a wonderful paragraph for you to use descriptive writing, what we were talking about in class, because what you've done here is present a really vague idea. Like, I get what you mean, but it would be really lovely, I think, for the reader to be able to see you as a family eating together, or to see you at church, right, and hear the music, and talk about maybe the way that people dress, right? Um, there's something about ceremony, when it comes to church, and when it comes to eating as a family, right? So maybe kind of capture some of those things. This section here is quite lovely, and if you pay attention to what you're doing here, and apply that to, like, this section, for example, in your service, I think the writing is going to be quite, like, much stronger. Because notice when you're writing about music, um, you're really using descriptive writing. You're connecting with the reader on an emotional level. I want to see you do that in other places as well, right? Um, I think that this conversation is really interesting too. This fact that, like, you kind of felt like you were straddling multiple worlds, um, and I think that that's something that a lot of different college students experience for a lot of different reasons, right? So one of the things that you're talking about here is straddling two different worlds, because of race. But sometimes college students talk about it, in terms of class. And honestly, I kind of think one of the reasons why you're talking about it is because of class too, and that's because you're talking about your parents. Um, so this section is pretty good. And I really like the conversation that you had with your brother. So, one thing to maybe think about, because this kind of feels like this is a moment of change for you. So, maybe could this narrative really be about uh, what made you recognize that, in spite of some of these adversities and struggles, that you still have the hope, right, to move forward, right? And this is like the conclusion that you've come to. And it's a good conclusion, I think, to come to. And I think that you're right here in your insight here. Um, so it's thinking about what story can you tell, right, to get the reader to this point. I think your use of dialogue here is pretty strong. And there are some good ideas here, but it's thinking about what can you expand and to discuss further. Um, I I'm not sure. I mean, I'll leave this up to you. Um, I like the fact that you're ending on a positive. Here, where I get what you mean when you're saying that the future feels like 1984. I think that you're right. We are in a moment of recognizing that we are living in a dystopia, right? I mean, it really does indeed feel that way. Uh, but I wonder if that's the place, like, to end on. Does that make sense? Because you start us up this kind of uh, incline of hope, right, in the face of adversity, and then you, like, leave us in this really kind of, like, dark and scary place. And I wonder if you can more clearly bring those ideas together, right? I mean, it's your narrative, but to me as your reader, I have to say I felt a little like, oh, even though I agree with what you're saying, right? It feels that way. But in terms of the writing itself, it feels like you walked away from this final idea too soon, kind of like what you did here. So, what I don't quite see yet is the arc, right? Which is what we talked about in class the other day, and that's okay. I'm not supposed to see the arc in this draft yet. So I think it's all the details that you can bring in that get you to maybe this point, or perhaps all the details to bring in to get you to this point, right? The fact that you were willing to serve, and it is a country that you love, but at the same time you recognize its flaws, and therefore what, right? What are you willing to do despite all that? Here's something that I want you to pay attention to. It looks like you have what is called homophone errors. And what I mean by that is when two words with different meanings with two words that sound the same, but they're spelled differently, and they have different meanings. So two, and two, for example, right? We pronounce these words the same way, but we spell them differently, and they all have different meanings. This is a number. This indicates also, and then this indicates two. For example, here where you say there, there's two forms of the word there that are all spelled differently with different meanings, right? So this one, THERE, indicates location. This is talking about possession, and this is a contraction. It's a shortened form of they are. So here, for example, what you say people who agreed and enforced their ideology. You're not talking about location. You're talking about possession, right? Whose ideology is it? It's theirs. And then look, it happened here again. And you can see that Microsoft is flagging it for you. Another place where I saw it, here, our and are, right? So are, of course, is a verb, but what you really mean is the pronoun our, right? It's more than one person. So pay attention to your homophone errors there. And Microsoft will flag some of those, but they won't flag all of those. Also, I just noticed this. Make sure that you are capitalizing proper nouns. So Jim Crow laws, for example, Jim Crow would be capitalized. So, like I said, I think what you're writing about is really interesting. What I want you to begin thinking about is how you can put it together in a clear, cohesive narrative with an arc. So start thinking about scenes, right? So start thinking about what we talked about in class. You want a beginning, a middle, and an end. So where are you going to start this story? And remember, we also need place, right? So it really feels like the place that you're writing about is the United States. But the United States is not in this draft at all. Notice you never mention that. You got to get it in there more directly, right? So make sure that, I think that that's a good place to start. What is it like? What is the United States like for you, right? In the 21st century. That's a good place for you to start. And then perhaps like the organization that we were talking about in class today, perhaps you can back up and then start talking about your family, right? And the specific values that you gained and how that led you to joining the service, to your brother, right? To where you are now, right? That you have a lot of hope for yourself, but you're still feeling conflicted about the way that the country is headed, right? So start thinking about what's the arc, what's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the turning point for you, and then what's the end, and then where are all the scenes in between. Okay? I look forward to seeing where you take this, and let me know if you have any questions.